Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Potawatomi Casino Hotel Milwaukee, home to 24/7 excitement, dining, and an on-site hotel at 1721 West Canal Street. More information at potawatomi.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Excaret Nunez. Today, we'll get a look at how Milwaukee County does its point-in-time count and how they're helping those experiencing homelessness. Then, we'll look at the long-term impact of declining births in Milwaukee.
The conversations you hear about school consolidation, school closings in MPS they've got to happen. There just aren't as many kids as there used to be, and all signs point to there being fewer in the future.
Plus, we'll learn about a stationery market happening this Saturday and the joy of using stickers, prints, and greeting cards.
You can be creative even though you're not the one who specifically made the items that you buy, but you can kind of transform those items into something else.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Excaret Nunez. Thanks for joining us today. Around this time every year, a snapshot of homelessness is taken across the nation. This is required by the federal government, and it's called the point-in-time count. So when you see statistics about homelessness, it's usually taken from point-in-time data. To complete this count, Milwaukee County outreach workers head out in the middle of the night to count those sleeping in the streets. Lake Effect's Sam Woods rode along with workers conducting the count last week and spoke to WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez about it.
So the point-in-time count happens once a year, and it's essentially folks go out and try to count the number of people that are sleeping on the streets, in this case in Milwaukee County, but it happens nationwide on the same day, same night. So it is a requirement of the federal government. Housing and Urban Development requires it to happen throughout the nation.
I think what makes this really almost hard to believe is that you all are going out in January when it couldn't be colder, it feels like, this past week. Can you tell me about who you went out with? Who does this count?
Yeah, so it's led by Milwaukee County, and the volunteers, although a number of them that I spoke to kind of alluded to, they were voluntold, they either work for the county or work in homeless outreach, homeless services, something in that sector. But those folks go out and they kind of divide the county into the northwest, northeast, southwest, and southeast, and downtown sections.
We have our list of downtown spots where we either know people are for sure at or have been spotted recently.
Like, I had this image of just like everyone forms a grid pattern and we just kind of like sweep the county, and like it's far more organized than that, partly because they do this all the time. A couple folks I talked to would describe what they do on their daily rounds, and it's very similar to the point in time.
What did you hear from people that were outdoors?
Yeah, so a lot of times tried to keep my distance. I was riding with Eric Collins-Dyke from the Milwaukee County, and sometimes he would say like, "Hey, I know this person. Keep your distance. They're not going to respond well to having a microphone in front of them," which is very fair, right?
Notice I got out of the car, and I did that on purpose. I think oftentimes if we're just talking to somebody in our car, there's this divide.
But the basic protocol seems to be that you go, you introduce yourself, you explain who you are, explain why you're there, and you ask, often multiple times, if they'd like shelter tonight. There's also a survey that you're supposed to complete as part of the point-in-time count, and it seemed like this is often done kind of informally, and we get things like name, birth date, some basic demographic information, often returning back to the question of like, hey, it's really cold out and going to get colder throughout the night. Would you like some shelter? And if they say no, last question is usually like, hey, do you want one of the sandwiches that we have in our car? And that usually got a yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
The guy we just saw is sort of indicative of what we've seen over the last few years in terms of an increase in older adults on the street. Unfortunately,
So you're kind of breaking down the scene and all of the work that went into it, and the fact that this is kind of like a snapshot that we're using going forward. So What should we know about that snapshot going forward? What does that mean for the city? What can the city expect?
Yeah. So the first thing is, while there is like the official point in time count, there's still a 7-day periods afterwards where they will continue to kind of make the same rounds, check the same spots, check the same areas, and try to find someone that they might have missed. Then once they have that data, there's a couple things. One, people working in this sector will have that to compare to last year, and it kind of helps have a check-in of like, okay, how are we doing as far as like, is what we're doing working? But also it means millions of dollars from the federal government. This will be part of grant applications to, make the case of, hey, we need these resources because this is what we're seeing, and it's not just an anecdote. We have this data. When you see in the future data on homelessness, whether it's in Milwaukee or anywhere in the nation, that kind of tracks a trend over years, often if you look at the fine print, it's going to be, sourced from point-in-time data.
That was Lake Effect's Sam Woods speaking with WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez. According to point-in-time data, Milwaukee has been uniquely successful in preventing homelessness. Whereas rates of homelessness have increased nationwide over the last decade, they've declined in Milwaukee. Christina Kohler is the impact manager for the Safe and Stable Homes Initiative at United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha County. United Way is the lead agency applying for federal funding for homeless services. Kohler joins Lake Effect's Sam Woods to discuss Milwaukee's approach to homeless services.
So we just heard in an earlier story about the point-in-time count that happened last week and continued follow-ups for a week afterward to try to get an accurate count of folks who are sleeping outside right now. But in addition to point-in-time, can you talk about the kinds of data southeastern Wisconsin collects regarding people who are not housed?
Right. So point-in-time data is sometimes called the Super Bowl of homelessness data collection. It is the official data source for the whole nation and how you compare yourself to other communities. But because it's a snapshot, we need other data sources for us as a system to understand the day-to-day kind of performance metrics of all of our providers working together. So we all use something called the Homeless Management Information System. It's a database shared by all the shelters, street outreach workers. So however a client enters the system, whatever door they come through, they're assessed the same, and all of that information is shared across all of those providers so we can connect them to the right service, but also follow their case plan and follow those metrics of have they exited to permanent housing destinations? Have they re-entered the system at any point in time? So that homeless management information system is a really great way to get really granular data on homeless outcomes. So we balance those two data sources, point in time as the official snapshot and the homeless management information system data.
So later we'll get into how this might be changing regarding funding, but can you explain how point-in-time data and HMIS data is used generally both for services and for obtaining funding for those services?
Well, for us to apply for funding to fund any of our services through the federal funding application that comes out, we have to show that we're hitting certain system performance measures that we use HMIS data for. Point-in-time data, it tends to be the data we use when we're communicating to the community what homelessness looks like on any given night.
So when I've spoken with folks working in this sector, the term housing first often comes up. What does housing first mean?
Do you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Sure.
Where it's that pyramid, and to get to the top of the pyramid, which is self-actualization. So you're feeling fulfilled that you're hitting all of your personal goals and reaching your full potential. You can't get there until you have the core, the bottom, the foundation met, and that foundation is those physiological needs. So things like food, water, clothing, fits in there. So after that, it's safety needs. So you really need safety and those basic needs met before you can move on. And that's really what Housing First is. It's meeting a person's real basic needs before saying, like, you can move on to these other elements of your life, maybe dealing with a mental health illness or something like that. So Housing First is not housing only. It's housing plus supportive services. So Housing First is a philosophy, and it's a philosophy that, most simply put, is this: housing is a human right, that people don't need to jump through hoops to get their basic needs met. A person doesn't need to prove that they deserve shelter, that they deserve housing. Everybody deserves housing. Everybody deserves the dignity of having a roof over their heads. So Housing First is a movement. We started enacting Housing First practices here in Milwaukee in 2015. So that means that we assess people, and those with the kind of longest lengths of experiences of homelessness were prioritized first. And we decided, instead of having them cycle through shelters, which clearly wasn't meeting their real needs, we would put them into housing. We would put them into apartments. We would connect them with supportive services, and we would do that for the long term. So Housing First is a really cost-effective measure, in addition to just being like the real dignified way to serve people. I have some numbers here from Milwaukee County when we first started Housing First. Within the 12 months before we housed a whole bunch of people, 98% of those people had municipal citations. In the 12 months after we housed all those people, that 98% dropped to 9%. So just being able to get indoors helps solve a lot of those issues, those loitering issues, public intoxication issues, because people just don't have a place to drink a beer, right? All of those things were solved by people just having a roof over their head. Consider emergency rooms as well. I have a case of one client, let's call him Joshua, who in the 90 days before he was housed, he used emergency rooms 105 times. In the 90 days after he was housed, he used emergency rooms just once. And I don't know the cost of an emergency room stay, but I can imagine it's really, really expensive. We can also consider mental health services. So those crisis response services, you see someone on the street, they're clearly having a hard time. You might call what we call our crisis response unit, that behavioral health. That one call costs over $1,000 for that visit, because these are trained professionals. They have to bring that person to a safe space and work through whatever that person's issues are. So in the first 12 months of housing people, we saved the community over $700,000 in reductions in those crisis response calls for people. So there's a clear financial benefit to housing people first, and there's just better results for our community in general, in terms of coming together, being one as a community, people feeling safe. There's just benefits on many levels.
You mentioned some numbers having to do with citations and emergency room stays. But can you go a little bit deeper? Like, how do we know Housing First is working? Like, how do we measure success when it comes to this? Yeah, I mean, first of all, people in housing aren't re-entering the homeless system. It has solved their homeless issue. And Milwaukee is incredibly special in how much we have invested in Housing First, not just the housing aspect, but the wraparound supportive services. So if you compare Milwaukee with other communities, we have the best or close to the best overall numbers related to homelessness. And I think this is something most people don't know. So in Milwaukee, over the past decade, homelessness has increased nationwide by 34%. But here in Milwaukee, because of our Housing First practices, we've seen a decrease by 41%. So increase by 34% nationwide, decrease here in Milwaukee by 41%. People should be really, really proud of that work. I was looking at the most recent national point-in-time numbers published by HUD, comparing us to all other major cities in the United States, and we have the lowest count of street homelessness out of all major U.S. cities. We also have the lowest count of chronically homeless individuals, and I think that's because we prioritize chronic homelessness as our number one factor of vulnerability when we were housing everybody back in 2015. And that kind of proves that
We housed people that were homeless for a year or longer. That's what chronically homeless means, and they have a disabling condition, and they haven't returned to the streets. And we're seeing the best numbers in the entire nation because of that. In addition to just the single adults, we're also seeing successes with families. So nationwide, we have the third lowest count of families experiencing homelessness. And overall, for all people, children, adults, we have the third lowest count of all individuals experience any kind of homelessness. So that could be staying in emergency shelter, staying in a safe haven or transitional housing, or unsheltered.
So you're listening to Lake Effect on WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Sam Wood speaking with Christina Kohler of United Way about data on homelessness and federal funding. And Christina, when it comes to funding these services that you're talking about and kind of making this housing first philosophy happen, that takes money, and a lot of it comes from the federal government. So can you talk about what has happened to a major federal grant over the last few months?
Yes. So there has been a lot of uncertainty, changes, almost chaos when it comes to some of the federal guidance and awards that are given to local communities to do this really hard work. Most of the funding that comes to the homeless service sector comes from the federal government. Here in Milwaukee, we receive about $16 million every year, and that's something that our local philanthropy groups and individual donors just can't make up such a high number. So we call this the HUD COC NOFO. NOFO, it means Notice of Funding Opportunity. So if we talk to anybody in this space, we just say the NOFO. So this NOFO, we spend months as a homeless coalition working on a collective plan with collective priorities, and we all agree on how we apply. In that application, it's submitted by the lead agency, the role that United Way is now serving for the community. In fall of 2025, the government changed some of their priorities and decided to cancel that second year of funding. And so our service providers had to scramble with the new NOFO with new rules for what we could apply for within a matter of weeks instead of months. And within that time, there wasn't a lot of guidance as well, but we did the best we could, and we're ready to submit something that would dramatically change our homeless system to meet these federal regulations. Those changes mean that we can no longer invest in the housing first supportive housing model that we believe in, that we've seen real results in, that only 30% of our award could go towards supportive housing programs. Well, right now it's about 90% of that $16 million award. So what's been happening is a lot of, court orders to change that new NOFO that came out with all those different regulations, potential for the government to reissue those original 2026 awards, which would be fantastic. But regardless of what happens right now, despite all this, court chaos, no matter what happens, we know the future of what to expect in future applications, which is that change away from housing first, away from supportive housing, away from things that are evidence-based, cost-effective, trauma-informed, things that we know work and can prove through our local data. In addition to having to change our local priorities, it also creates a sense of uncertainty. Like right now, imagine being a homeless service provider and trying to plan a budget for this next year. Already, we've seen some of our shelters have to let go some of their staff. We've seen them have to cut some of their programs. Even if this 2026 funding gets renewed, there's going to be about 6 months where our local service providers won't have any money, and they're relying on private lines of credit to pay their staff, which means they're paying interest on loans to pay their staff to serve the most vulnerable people in our community. It's unconscionable.
You spoke to this a little bit before, but what comes next? As best we can tell, what does the future hold?
I think because Milwaukee has had such a long, strong history of knowing what it looks like to house people with supportive services. We'll of course abide by any federal guidance and regulations, but eventually, Milwaukee wants to stay true to serving people with dignity. So the heart of what we do is never going to change. The funding mechanisms might. We may need to rely less on federal donations, or federal awards, rather. We may need to rely more on our local corporations and individual donors to pick up that slack, to fill that gap, so we can continue having the best homeless service sector in the nation. We're going to continue working with coalitions across the nation. They reach out to Milwaukee, asking us how do we do what we do, and we are more than happy to share our models and the way we collaborate. We're going to continue to fight the good fight and keep people's dignity in mind.
Well, Christina, thank you so much for joining me on Lake Effect. I appreciate your time.
This was great. Thank you.
Christina Kohler is the impact manager for the Safe and Stable Homes Initiative at United Way. She spoke with Lake Effect's Sam Woods. You can listen to the full interview and learn more about the point-in-time count at wuwm.com. Lake Effect is available as a podcast, so you can listen whenever you like. Find it wherever you get your podcasts, then subscribe, download, and listen on demand. In about 10 minutes, we'll look at the potential long-term impacts of Milwaukee's declining birth rate. But first, we'll look at how Wisconsin's school voucher program has changed over the last 30 years. That's coming up on Lake Effect on WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Excurret Nunez. School vouchers started right here in Milwaukee as a way for families with low incomes to send their kids to private schools. That was in 1990. New reporting from Wisconsin Watch finds that now, nearly half of all private school students in our state use publicly funded vouchers toward their tuition. Wisconsin Watch data reporter Hong Yu Lu used records from the Department of Public Instruction to look at how the voucher program has changed since it first began. He joins WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel to share his reporting.
Okay, so let's start with this headline. You found that almost half of all students attending private schools in Wisconsin receive some sort of voucher paid for by public funds. You wrote that this signals a, quote, rapid reshaping of the state's educational landscape powered by state taxpayers. Can you tell us a little bit about what you meant by that?
Yeah, so back in the 1990s when the Milwaukee voucher school programs first started, only 300 students enrolled in the first year. But then in this year, we have just reached over 60,000 statewide for the first time. So the sheer size of the programs right now in this year, it's just so huge to be simply ignored. And there's so many students who already went through the voucher programs, and there's so much fundings that were directed into this program so that both the lawmakers and the peoples out there and the parents should know more about what is going on and what exactly is this voucher program. And following up on that, for the school year 2024 to 2025, we have calculated that 46% of all private school students in Wisconsin have received vouchers across the state's 4 programs. And this year, of course, the total headcount for voucher students have increased. We are expecting to see around 50% of all the private school students in Wisconsin are going to be participating in the voucher program.
Wow, yeah. And we should say there's about 130,000 students who attend private schools across the state. We've been talking about vouchers for a really long time here in Wisconsin, but let's just run through the basics real fast. A voucher is part of a school choice program where a parent can choose to send their child to a private school. By applying for a voucher through the State Department of Public Instruction, tuition up to a certain amount will be paid for the child. There are income limits in order to qualify for this program. But this program began, as you point out, in 1990. And when you adjust for the cost of inflation, it cost taxpayers around $1.78 million then. You ran the calculations for the cost to taxpayers this year. What'd you find?
So this year, we're expecting a little over $700 million by school year 2025 to 2026. So this is a huge jump in comparison to how it started. And to put it into a much closer comparison, the number has nearly doubled compared to the school year 2019 to 2020, which was slightly before the pandemic. And in the past decade, we have seen a steady and relatively fast growth in the total cost. From our analysis, we attribute this growth mostly by increase in participation and a higher voucher funds per student each year.
Yeah. A voucher can pay for anywhere from $10,000 to $13,000 in funding per student, correct?
Yes, correct. And also we have the special needs programs, which is up to $16,000.
Per student, okay.
Per student.
Wow. We're chatting here in our studios in Milwaukee, and our city's choice program runs a little bit differently. There are 4 choice programs throughout the state. We've got a statewide program, a program specifically for students with special needs, a choice program in Milwaukee, and one in Racine. Can you talk a little bit about how Milwaukee's choice program is funded and how it's different from the other ones?
Yes, so Milwaukee program has just went through a landmark of reshaping how it was entirely founded. As of 2024, it is the first year that the whole program was directly funded by the state budget. As what we mentioned before, the voucher programs have set a cost per person price tag, and the state budget will calculate the number of enrollments times the price tag per each student and gives them a total number and give that as a voucher form to the private schools that the students are enrolled at, which is different from the other 3 programs, which was through a much more complicated process of rebudgeting the funds that were supposed to be given to the local school districts. And for the local school districts outside Milwaukee, they are also allowed to match up for the money they lost from the loss of students through a tax levying, which is what we see in Green Bay recently, which passed through a transparency law of telling the taxpayers how much of the tax levy was as a result from these vouchers.
It's on their tax bills, right? Green Bay literally will say, we are raising our taxes this much to cover school vouchers, right?
Exactly.
That was such an interesting detail in this reporting. And so when we think about school choice and vouchers, I think a lot of people think about money, an exact number of dollars being taken from a public school district budget and being distributed to private schools. And what I hear you saying is that is what is happening on a statewide level and in the Racine program, but Milwaukee's is just a little bit different because of that full state funding, right?
Exactly, yeah. So the Milwaukee public schools, when they were calculating the state budgets, they did not consider the amount of students that have been participating in the voucher programs. Of course, since the voucher programs was directly funded by the state budgets, the Milwaukee public schools do not get the chance to conduct the tax levy to cover their loss financially as a result of the voucher program. Yeah. So it is much different from the rest of the state.
I'm just so interested that we have data that goes so far back in Milwaukee because so many other states are starting these voucher programs and we don't really know where those programs are going to be 20, 30 years down the line, but we have an example of how that works in Milwaukee. So Milwaukee has always led the country in that way, whether people think that is good or not. So one of the sources in your story, who some in Milwaukee may know, Alan Borsick, points out that many private schools here would not be able to operate if not for vouchers. You looked into enrollment and cash flow and how it's changing for private schools. What did you find?
Following up on the point that Alan made during our interview, he emphasized that his claim was mostly talking about the affordability of the private schools, since the price tag is not always attainable for a lot of struggling families out there. So during our studies, we have analyzed the number of enrollments between 2011 and 2024, which is the period after the voucher programs got expanded to Racine and then the rest of the state, and also adding in the special needs programs. We have seen that the public schools enrollment across the states has dropped by about 65,000 students, but at the same time, the private schools saw a gain of 1,600 students. just keep in mind that the overall trend of the number of students across the states is in declining. So a gain is definitely some number much more significant than how it sounds right now. Of course, we also have to note that the home-based studies have gained popularity vastly since the pandemic as well. So we definitely see a drop in the public school enrollments. And overall, like more than half of all the private schools, about 56% in Wisconsin, now accept vouchers. And this year, 91 private schools had 90% or more of its students to participate in the voucher program.
Wow. So in those schools, like the ones you just mentioned, almost every child in that school is using a voucher to attend that school.
Yes, correct.
I want to zoom out for a little bit because we've been talking a lot about how these programs are funded and where students come from. You also asked the question in your reporting whether students do better once they've moved to private schools using a voucher. Were you able to find an answer to that question?
From my own reporting, I found that it is definitely a heated debate in the academic world in terms of the academic achievements for students after they move to the voucher programs. I do want to highlight a study by Huria Jabbar, who is a professor at the USC. So she reviewed 92 studies nationwide tracking academic achievement for voucher students between 1992 and 2015. And she concluded that she found mixed results. And during my personal interview, Alan Borsak said he thinks there's no evident benefit academically for voucher schools, and the education quality varies from school to school. And of course, when we're talking about achievements from students, the test scores are only one single aspect of this. There's much more that's really difficult to quantify, and which requires further studies. And we need scholars to follow real people who have went through the transition and see what are their changes before and after joining the voucher program.
35 years of vouchers in Milwaukee, and you summed this up beautifully. Thank you so much for sharing your reporting with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hong-Yu Liu is the data investigative reporter at Wisconsin Watch. He spoke with WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel. You can read his reporting at wuwm.com or at wisconsinwatch.org. Wisconsin's population grew by 3.6% in the last census. But that data also shed a light on another reality. The state's youth population is continuing to decline. It's been a trend that's played out slowly over the last 2 decades, but now that trend is speeding up, especially here in Milwaukee. John Johnson is a research fellow at the Marquette Law School Lubar Center, and he recently published data on Milwaukee's so-called baby bust. He joins Lake Effect's Joy Powers to talk about the data and what the baby bust could mean for the city's future.
What is a baby bust?
So we're seeing fewer and fewer babies born in Milwaukee each year, which is not in itself a surprise because the number of births is declining pretty much everywhere. But it's happening pretty quickly here, more quickly than I expected. So the number of babies born last year in the city of Milwaukee was about 7,400, a little less than that. That's down 5% from 2024. It's down 15% from 2020 and 29% fewer than in 2010.
Mm. So this is really the opposite of, let's say, a baby boom. Are there explanations for what we're seeing? Because as your data found, this is a trend that's happening kind of everywhere, but in the city of Milwaukee, we're really outpacing the trend.
Yeah, there's 2 things contributing to this. One of them is that moms are having fewer babies. Fewer people are having babies, and then people who do have babies are usually having fewer of them. So that's happening, and it happens at different times for different groups. So like we saw the birth rate for white mothers fall pretty quickly, and then we're seeing a similar thing happen for Black moms and Latino moms. So you see these things happen at different times for different racial groups, and because of the composition of racial groups in Milwaukee being different than, say, the suburbs of the rest of the state, the timing is a little different in the different places. So that's part of it. But the speed at which it is happening in Milwaukee suggests to me that we're also seeing this as the result of people moving out of the city before they start families. So like over the course of the 2010s, we had this big drop in the number of babies born in the city of Milwaukee, whereas the number of babies born to moms living in the suburbs stayed the same across the decade.
What's the upshot here? What's the impact on Milwaukee? Fewer babies. That information by itself feels pretty neutral.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a thing that is true about the world, but it has some important repercussions, beginning with hospitals that deliver babies. So, we saw a maternity ward shut down on the south side a couple of years ago. I believe there was some reporting from WWM on that. And then you see this with daycares. I don't have great data on this yet, but I have noticed anecdotally, I'm at that stage of life where many people I know are having babies. And I've talked to a lot of people who've had a really easy time getting into daycare, which is not something I've traditionally heard. But I know of multiple daycares that have no waiting list at all, some that don't even staff all of their newborn rooms because they don't have demand for it right now. And then, of course, we see this in schools as well. So first grade enrollment has fallen a lot, tracking with the lower number of kids born 6 years earlier. In a bigger picture, it's not entirely clear what this means for Milwaukee overall, this pattern of declining birth rates across the board, because in other countries, like Japan, for instance, the birth rate is lowest in the cities and higher in the rural areas, but the population of the rural areas is falling while the cities are staying stable or even growing. And that's because the people who are born in rural areas, when they grow to be young adults, they frequently move to the city. So how this plays out in the long run is sometimes counterintuitive.
Mm. But one of the things your article mentions is really the impact on schools. So yes, when people get older, they may be moving to Milwaukee, but if they're not staying here to have kids, what is the impact that has on our school systems?
Yeah, just fewer kids attending school. So we see this, it's a pretty direct relationship, and it happens quite consistently. Fewer kids are born. We know that we have a net outflow of children ages 0 to 5 in Milwaukee. More of them move out of the city than move in. Their families move out of the city. And so the number of sixth graders that we get is always less than the number of kids born in the city 6 years earlier. And this always affects each kind of school. It happens across sectors. So here we have a lot of private schools and charter schools and then district schools. It's going to affect all of them. And it means that the conversations you hear about school consolidation, school closings and MPS they've got to happen. There just aren't as many kids as there used to be, and all signs point to there being fewer in the future. That doesn't make the importance of education less. It doesn't mean that we need to spend less money on that. My fear is that we'll be spending all of this money maintaining buildings instead of educating kids, because the buildings were built for a time when we had many, many more students than we do now.
So when I look at this issue, I see a lot of solutions that really rely on more federal or state policy changes. These are things like, subsidizing childcare in different ways, making it easier to have children. Most of those solutions are going to really lie in the hands of people at the state or federal level. Is there anything to try to reverse or even just blunt this trend at the city level?
Yeah, the simplest solution is immigration, which rests with the federal government as well, to your point. But what the city can do is focus on the reasons why young families are net leavers of the city instead of movers here. So, yeah, you're not really going to drive the birth rate up, particularly at a municipal level, but you can affect some of the reasons that so many families feel like when they're planning on having a kid or right after they've had a kid that now's the time they need to leave the city. I think focusing on school quality is a really important way to do that. Again, focusing on the quality of schools and not maintaining the same number of school buildings to serve this dwindling number of students. And then, all the other kinds of quality of life issues that affect families, crime, housing quality, that kind of stuff.
For sure. Well, John Johnson, thank you as always for joining us here on Lake Effect.
It's always a pleasure.
John Johnson is a research fellow at the Marquette Law School Lubar Center. Still to come, we'll learn about a Milwaukee market selling stationery goods and encouraging people to connect via snail mail. That's next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. This is Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Excret Nunez. When was the last time you wrote a letter to someone you love? Well, the snail mail stationery market has got you covered just in time for Valentine's Day. You can check out the market this Saturday at Anodyne Coffee in Walker's Point and enjoy stickers, posters, cards, and more. It's the market's second year, and all the stationery is illustrated and printed by 8 local artists. Chandler Hogan is one of those artists and the organizer of the Snail Mail Stationery Market. She joins me to talk about her love for stationery and what people can expect to see at this year's event. Before we chat all things snail mail, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you as a graphic designer and illustrator. I was wondering if you could describe some of your designs and illustrations.
Yeah, so my work pulls from nature. My childhood, I grew up on a farm, so I draw a lot of farm life, and I take a lot of inspiration from just rural areas, maybe overlooked things that you kind of find the beauty in every day. One of my favorite pieces that I've made is a lovingly rendered image of a tobacco plant, which my family grows. And it's kind of one of those things where you don't think it's beautiful, but they have like the most beautiful blooms that are actually like cut off and like thrown away, whereas you usually want the leaves instead. But yeah, so I'm kind of just inspired by things from my childhood and different kinds of crafts. I've been really interested in quilted patterns. That's been something that I've been seeing a lot. I think it's kind of trending now, but it's something that is like very nostalgic and homey. And there's a lot you can do with that, and it has a lot of rich cultural background. So that's something that I've been kind of exploring.
Definitely. I find your work really like comforting and like warm. Like, I don't know, it just gives me like makes me nostalgic for summer in Wisconsin. Yeah,
I definitely love the summer the most. I just love creating a space to kind of escape.
And you're hosting the Snail Mail Stationery Market this Saturday. It's the second year in a row that you've done this. How did the idea to host something like this in Milwaukee come up for you?
Yeah, so I have been vending for about 3 years now, and one of the biggest things that I wanted to do was to have the market kind of vendor-centered. So I really took in my vendors' like ideas to see what I could do better next year. I've been to a lot of markets, not a lot, but some markets where I didn't feel maybe the vendor was put as the most important thing. It was very centered around people coming, which totally makes sense, but also having a balance of working with the vendors and making sure they're comfortable, everything's working for them, and I feel like the rest will fall into place. So yeah, that was definitely something I wanted to highlight.
That really makes sense. And I want to talk about the stationery aspect of this market. What about stationery draws you in? Like, are there like particular items, or is it just something about like physically having the artwork?
Yeah, I started making stationery because it made the most sense for applying my artwork to these pieces because I'm already making prints. So I started actually making artwork for stationery, which is really different in my opinion. You're going into the project knowing this is going to be a notepad, this is going to be a journal cover or something. So it's a little different than just like making art and then thinking like, oh, I can make stickers out of this. So it just made sense for what I do. But my love for it definitely draws me in that it's physical, that you can manipulate it, that you can be creative even though you're not the one who specifically made the items that you buy, but you can kind of transform those items into something else.
I'm Lake Effect's Excret Nunez, speaking with Chandler Hogan, organizer of the Snail Mail Stationery Market in Milwaukee. Chandler, tell me about this Saturday's stationery market. Where should people go, and what can they expect to see?
So this Saturday, if you go to the Anodyne in Walker's Point from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., we will be slinging our stationery, me and 7 other vendors. All of our stationery is handmade by us, no AI art, from different mediums, lino cut, digital, risograph, printed, all over the board. And when you walk in, there will be a volunteer holding cards, and that is for our stamp rally. Whenever you are buying a piece of stationery, it doesn't matter how much or how little it was, you will receive a stamp. And if you buy from 6 different vendors, you will receive a little bag full of stationery goodies that is not available at any of the other tables. It's not like you're getting repeats or anything. And I'm really excited to offer this. This is not something I did last year. And we'll also have volunteers wearing snail mail shirts. They'll be walking around if you need any help. And then we'll also have a tiny booth that will be selling snail mail stickers and extra snail mail shirts because I ordered too many.
So you mentioned, including you, there will be 8 graphic designers, illustrators, artists at Snail Mail. How did you decide who to showcase?
I take into consideration people's different styles, different demographics that they're trying to reach, the medium that they're using, and just kind of like the vibe that they're all giving, because I really want to have a range of different kinds of artwork throughout, because it's no fun to go to a market and everything's kind of samey. And it also helps me choose people that maybe are newer or are just starting out. Last year, I hosted Allie Miller, who is a very accomplished graphic designer, but had just started selling. So her work was like advanced, but her setup wasn't as intricate as someone that has been doing it for years. So it was just really rewarding.
Yeah, I really love that. And you did send me a list of the vendors that are going to be at Snail Mail, but I would love to highlight a few local artists that'll be there. One that I'm super excited to see prints from is Reese Hadzima. Tell me about their work.
So Reese is a lino cut artist, print block maker. I first saw their work at Hovercraft, and I was very impressed by their craft. As someone that does lino cut, I know how hard it is. I know how easy it is to get ink everywhere. So just seeing how clean they can get their work is just really impressive. I definitely like to have someone that is doing really hands-on kind of work at these things, because just handmade goods are kind of overlooked. So it's having something that has been carved by someone, printed, and just a lot of work put into things, I just feel like that's invaluable.
And another cool vendor I'm excited to check out is a duo called Kaya Belly. Can you tell me a little bit about their work?
Yeah, the first time I met them was at the Blueberry Festival in River West. I was very impressed by their different illustrations, the colors, the vibrancy that they were able to achieve. And I talked to them a little bit at this market, and it seemed like they had just started, and their work seemed very advanced. So when I saw that they had applied, I definitely wanted them to be a part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like their work is like super joyful, and it made me nostalgic in a way.
Definitely. I was very inspired, to be honest, by their subject matters, use the proportions of different animals and kind of push them and pull them. And I thought that was just really interesting.
Another Wisconsin artist that'll be featured at Snail Mail is Maggie Carroll, who I recently discovered designed a page in a risograph calendar I bought last year.
Yeah. Their risograph stuff is so cool. I met Maggie at their thesis show, and I was really impressed by their risograph. I love riso. I always drawn to risograph when I go to different markets. I don't know what it is about the colors or the kind of grain texture that you kind of get with that. And Maggie Carroll also won the Dandelion Residency at Lion's Tooth recently, which is an awesome award. That award gives you the space to create comics, which is something that I'm really interested as well. So Maggie's kind of doing all of these things that are just so up my alley. So I was really excited when she also applied. I feel like when I look at her work, she's not overthinking anything. She's just kind of doing what comes naturally. I love her work.
Yeah, I'm so excited to check her out. Honestly, I saw some of her work and I'm like, could be on the cover of a New Yorker magazine.
Yeah, it definitely gives that for sure.
Well, Chandler, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I am so excited to check out Snail Mail this weekend.
Thank you. I hope you come get some stationery and meet some awesome local artists.
Chandler Hogan is a graphic designer, illustrator, and organizer of the Snail Mail Stationery Market. You can check out the market this Saturday at Anodyne Coffee in Walker's Point from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. That's Lake Effect for today. I'm Excret Nunez. Audrey Nowakowski, Joy Powers, and Sam Woods join me in producing Lake Effect each week, with help from Graham Thomas. Becky Mortensen is our executive producer, and Emily Files helps edit the show. We also heard from Susan Bentz, Catherine Kokel, Jimmy Gutierrez, Maria Peralta Arellano, and Mayan Silver from the WUWM news team this week. Jason Reevy is our studio engineer, Valeria Navarro Villegas is our digital operations manager, and Trapper Shep wrote our theme music. If you missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. And if you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Join us again on Monday at noon to learn how one Milwaukee neighborhood worked for years to prevent basement flooding. Plus, we'll meet up with one of Milwaukee's senior social clubs. Thanks so much for joining us today on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.